William Henry Harrison was born on February 9, 1773 in British America. He was the last president to be a subject of England. Despite many years later, during his presidential campaign about living in a log cabin, Harrison was born and raised on the Berkeley Plantation in Charles City County, Virginia. He was the seventh and youngest child of Virginia governor and planter Benjamin Harrison V, a member of the powerful Harrison family of Virginia. Harrison was homeschooled until he was 14 years old before he was sent off to the prestigious Hampden-Sydney College. He studied there for 3 years before his father removed him from the school. When his father died in 1791, Harrison was looked after by Robert Morris, a family friend who sent him to the University of Pennsylvania to study medicine. During his time at the University of Pennsylvania, he studied medicine under Dr. Benjamin Rush and Professor William Shippen, before dropping out a few months later due to a lack of funds. 18 years old and out of school, another friend of the family, Governor Henry Lee, convinced Harrison to join the U.S. Army. In the late summer of 1791, Harrison joined the 1st American Regiment as a young officer. He was stationed at Fort Washington and was also a recruiter, looking for volunteers to sign up and fight in the Northwest Indian War. A year later, Harrison was promoted from junior officer to lieutenant and was placed with General Anthony Wayne, who taught the young man how to fight natives. Harrison took part in the Battle of the Fallen Timbers on August 20th, 1794, which ended the Northeast War when they defeated the Northwest Indian Confederacy. General Wayne was impressed with Harrison's bravery in battle, saying, "I must add the name of my faithful and gallant aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Harrison, who rendered the most essential service by communicating my orders in every direction, conduct and bravery, exciting the troops to press on for victory." In 1795, Harrison ran off and eloped with the love of his life, Anna Sims. The hastily arranged marriage was due to her father John refusing to marry her off to a military man, especially one who killed natives. He was promoted to captain on 1797 but resigned from the U.S. Army a year later to pursue a career in politics. In the fall of 1798, at the age of 26, Harrison was elected to the 1st congressional delegate of the Northwest Territory when he defeated his opponent by 1 vote. After his 2-year term ended, President John Adams appointed Harrison as governor of the Indiana Territory, a position he would hold on to for the next 12 years. 5 years after being governor, Harrison ordered the construction of the Grouseland, a large plantation house for his ever-growing family. He would go on to have 10 children. His wife Anna, who will bore him those 10 children, due to the multiple births in a short period of time, will leave her with many chronic health problems that she would suffer throughout for the rest of her life. During his 12 years as governor, his job was to negotiate treaties with the native tribes, which would legally take away their lands for the federal government. He had many of the tribes in the region sign away their territories through treaties. The 1804 Treaty of St. Louis, the Treaty of the Grouseland, which helped build his plantation house, and the Treaty of Fort Wayne, which would lead to dire consequences a few years down the road. Harrison, a slave owner, went to Congress to try and have Article 6 of the Ordinance of 1787 suspended for 10 years, which stated, "There shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in said territory, otherwise than in punishment of crimes whereof the party shall have duly convicted, provided always that any person escaping to the same from whom slave, labor, or service is lawfully claimed in any one of the original states, such fugitive may be lawfully reclaimed and conveyed to the person claiming his or her labor or service, as aforesaid." Thomas Jefferson, who was the main author of the ordinance, clandestinely worked with abolitionists in the Indiana Territory, led by James Lemon, to help squash Harrison's attempts to make Indiana a pro-slavery region. Around 1805, a member of the Shawnee tribe known as the Prophet was slowly organizing displaced natives who were kicked out of their own lands due to one-sided land treaties their leaders made with William Henderson. For the next 3 years, he gathered a spiritual movement of natives from different tribes who were united in one goal, to reclaim the land from the white settlers. His older brother, Chief Tecumseh of the Shawnees, joined him, and by 1808 the two formed the Tecumseh Confederacy. The chief was angry about the Treaty of Fort Wayne, which was signed in 1809, which gave away 3 million acres of native land to Harrison's Indiana government. The Shawnees, whose lands were near the recently sold acreage, were very unhappy. Around that time, Harrison signed a law forbidding the sale of alcohol to natives on August 23, 1809. But he gave the leaders of the tribes, whom agreed to the Treaty of Fort Wayne, which was signed on September 30th, over 200 gallons of whiskey. Tecumseh and his crew traveled to the capital of Indiana Territory in Vincennes and met face-to-face with Harrison. He demanded that the governor rescind the treaty. Harrison told him no, that it was legally purchased. Tecumseh replied that if you don't tear up the treaty, then you and I will have to fight it out. After the meeting, Tecumseh spent the next several months recruiting more followers and warriors into his confederacy, and met with Harrison again on July of 1811, and told him that he organized a large force from the north and is going on to recruit an even larger one from the south. Harrison realized that Tecumseh doesn't know the American way of fighting, so he took advantage of Tecumseh's absence and organized an army of over 1,000 strong. After a few months of planning and supplying his soldiers, Harrison led his troops into battle against the Tecumseh Confederacy, led by the Prophet, on November 7th, 1811, at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Outnumbering the warriors 2-1, Harrison's forces easily crushed their poorly armed adversaries. The Prophet, who was not a warrior, and his plan to attack the soldiers early in the morning, due to divine intervention that he received from the spirits, gave him the plan to kill Harrison at his camp, but it was a complete and utter failure. Tecumseh and his best warriors were still on a recruiting trip and weren't around to participate in the battle. After defeating the Prophet and his warriors, Harrison then moved on to Prophetstown and burned it to the ground, ending the threat of Tecumseh's Confederacy in Indiana. The battle made him a war hero, earning the nickname Tippecanoe. It was later found out that the Shawnees were allegedly being supplied by the British Army, which in turn would be one of the factors which would lead to the War of 1812. When the War of 1812 broke out, Harrison resigned as governor of the Indiana Territory and rejoined the U.S. Army. He was made the commander of the Army of the Northwest on September 17, 1812. For the next 2 years, Harrison fought campaigns against the Allied forces of the British and native armies. General Harrison finally got to meet Tecumseh on the battlefield at the Battle of the Thames on October 5, 1813. The U.S. Army outnumbered the British Army and the Confederacy force by 3-1 and easily crushed them. Along with this victory and the one at Tippecanoe, Harrison solidified his status as a war hero. Sadly, Tecumseh was killed in the battle by U.S. Army Colonel Richard Johnson. His death demoralized the rest of the Confederacy, which broke up for good. During the final months of the War of 1812, Secretary of War John Armstrong decided to divide the command of the Northwest and sent Harrison to a frontier outpost and gave the command to one of his subordinates. This was due to the two of them constantly arguing over the failed invasion of Canada. Harrison resigned from the army, but was later awarded a medal for his brave service after a congressional investigation into his sudden resignation from the military. On September 8, 1815, Harrison took part in the Treaty of Springwells. This treaty ended the conflict between the U.S. government and the hostilities with the native tribes who took part in the War of 1812 on the side of the British. The deal reaffirmed the Treaty of Greenville. After the war, Harrison really lived it up to his reputation as a celebrity until he was way over his head in debt. To capitalize on his fame, Harrison ran for Congress in Ohio's 1st Congressional District and served 1.5 terms. He was later elected to the Ohio Senate in 1819 after failing to become President Monroe's Secretary of War in 1817. He lost his bid to become a congressman in 1822, but was elected to the Senate in 1824. Harrison was appointed minister to Columbia on May 20th, 1824, after resigning from the Senate. But his time in Columbia was unpleasant due to his constantly butting heads with Simon Bolivar, whom he felt was becoming a dictator. Bolivar said he didn't appreciate Harrison meddling into his affairs and demanded that he be replaced. To avoid an international incident, the incoming president, Andrew Jackson, replaced Harrison when he assumed office. On March 1829, Harrison finally retired from public office and lived on his farm in borderline poverty with his wife from 1829 to 1836, when he was dragged back into the spotlight, once again when the Whig Party nominated him for president along with 3 other Whig candidates. He came in second place with 73 electoral votes, losing to the Democratic nominee Martin Van Buren, who was Andrew Jackson's personal choice for his successor. Harrison would be nominated by the Whig Party again for the 1840 presidential election, and they would really push his status as a war hero and a common man who lived in a log cabin against incumbent Democrat President Martin Van Buren, whom they portrayed as a stoody aristocrat. Harrison, at the age of 68, would achieve his dream of becoming President of the United States.